Keep your hands where I can see them." The command cut through the cold night with enough force to make everyone nearby stop moving. Senator Marcus Reed stood beside his dark blue SUV under the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car, his palms open, his voice calm, his breathing controlled. Across from him, Officer Daniel Mercer held the scene with the confidence of a man who believed the badge on his chest settled every argument before it began. Marcus had been stopped less than 10 minutes earlier, yet somehow a simple roadside encounter had become something larger, heavier, impossible to ignore. A woman near the sidewalk had raised her phone to record. Mercer noticed immediately. "Put that away," he snapped. She hesitated but kept filming. Marcus glanced toward her, then back at Mercer. "Officer," he said quietly, "the camera you should worry about isn't hers." Mercer's expression hardened. He stepped closer. "You think this is funny?" Marcus shook his head. "No. I think you're making a decision you may not be able to take back." The air seemed to tighten around them. A second officer, Ethan Cole, stood several feet behind Mercer near the cruiser, watching with growing uncertainty. He had seen Marcus cooperate from the beginning. He had seen him keep both hands visible. He had heard him answer every question without raising his voice. And still, Mercer continued as though calmness itself were suspicious. "Turn around," Mercer ordered. Marcus did. There was no resistance, no argument, no sudden movement. Just the quiet sound of metal closing around his wrists. Click. For one brief second, the entire street seemed to go silent. Mercer leaned closer, his voice low and certain. "Tonight, your title means nothing." Marcus slowly turned his head just enough to meet his eyes. "You may want to remember those words." Mercer gave a short, dismissive laugh. To him, Marcus Reed was simply another black man standing beside an expensive vehicle in a neighborhood where Mercer had already decided he looked out of place. The leather Senate credential wallet Marcus had shown him meant nothing. The state seal on the folder resting inside the SUV meant nothing. Even Marcus's measured warning sounded, to Mercer, like arrogance. What Mercer did not know was that Marcus had spent the evening discussing police accountability with local community leaders. He did not know that the blue folder inside the vehicle contained records connected to complaints from this very precinct. And he certainly did not know that somewhere across the state, Marcus Reed's absence was already being noticed. Mercer turned toward the cruiser, satisfied that he had taken control of the situation. Ethan looked again at Marcus's identification, then at the name printed across the screen in front of him. His face changed. "Dan," he said carefully, "you need to look at this." Mercer barely glanced back. "Not now." Ethan swallowed. "I think you really need to look." Marcus remained beside the SUV, hands secured, posture straight, eyes steady beneath the flashing lights. He wasn't wondering whether Mercer would discover who he was. That part was inevitable. He was wondering what would happen when Mercer realized that being wrong about one man was about to expose something much bigger. 27 minutes earlier, Marcus Reed had stepped out of the Franklin Community Center into a cool Virginia night, carrying a blue folder beneath one arm, and the quiet exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 hours listening more than speaking. The town hall had been about public trust, police accountability, and a proposed state oversight measure that had already divided lawmakers, officers, and neighborhood leaders across the district. Marcus had stayed long after the scheduled ending because an elderly pastor wanted to tell him about a traffic stop involving his grandson. Then a school counselor asked whether complaint records could ever be reviewed independently. And finally, a young mother stood near the exit and said something Marcus could not forget. People should not need connections to be treated fairly. He had nodded, written the sentence in the margin of his notes, and promised only one thing. He would keep asking questions. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. Rain from earlier had left the pavement shining under the lamps, turning every reflection into a blurred ribbon of yellow and white. Marcus placed the blue folder on the passenger seat of his sport utility vehicle, loosened his tie, and checked the time. He was supposed to meet his legislative aide, Rachel Brooks, at the state office before 10, but he sent her a short message saying he would be a little late. No emergency. No concern. Just another long evening in public service. He pulled onto the road and drove through quiet residential blocks at the posted speed, passing brick homes, dark storefronts, and a gas station glowing at the corner. 5 minutes later, headlights appeared behind him. Then came the red and blue lights. Marcus glanced at the dashboard, then at the rearview mirror. He was not speeding. His registration was current. One brake light had been replaced the previous week. Still, he signaled, moved carefully to the shoulder, and stopped beneath a street lamp. Years of experience had taught him not to assume what a stop meant before an officer explained it. He lowered the window and placed both hands high on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Officer Daniel Mercer approached from the driver's side with slow, deliberate steps. His flashlight moved across the back seat, the center console, Marcus's jacket, then finally Marcus's face. License and registration. Marcus gave a polite nod. Of course, officer. My wallet is in my inside jacket pocket. May I reach for it? Mercer paused before answering. Slowly, Marcus followed the instruction exactly. He handed over his license and registration without complaint. Mercer looked at the name, then back at Marcus. This vehicle yours? Yes. What are you doing in this neighborhood? The question was simple. The tone was not. Marcus glanced once at the homes around him, then returned his eyes to Mercer. Driving back from a community meeting, Mercer looked through the window again. His flashlight stopped on the blue folder resting on the passenger seat. A state seal was visible on the cover. What kind of meeting? Marcus answered evenly. Public policy. Mercer gave a faint, humorless smile. That's supposed to impress me? Marcus did not react. No, officer. You asked. For the first time, Mercer's expression changed. Not much. Just enough. And standing several feet behind him near the patrol car, Officer Ethan Cole noticed it too. Mercer held Marcus's license beneath the beam of his flashlight for several seconds longer than necessary, as though the plastic card might eventually confess to something the man himself had not. Marcus Reed, he said slowly. You live across town. Marcus kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. That is correct. Mercer glanced toward the passenger seat again. The blue folder seemed to bother him more than it should have. And you expect me to believe you just happened to be driving through here after some policy meeting? Marcus looked at him without hostility. I do not expect you to believe anything without checking. That is what the documents are for. Ethan Cole shifted near the patrol car. He had heard enough traffic stops to recognize when questions were becoming less about verification and more about control. Mercer returned the license through the window, but did not step away. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus paused. May I ask why? The change in Mercer was immediate. His shoulders stiffened. His voice lost what little patience it had carried. Because I told you to. Marcus nodded once. I am not refusing. I am asking for the reason. Out of the vehicle. Marcus unfastened his seat belt slowly and opened the door. He moved carefully, making sure every motion could be seen. The street was quiet except for the low hum of the patrol car and the distant sound of tires passing on a larger road several blocks away. Marcus stood beside the sport utility vehicle with his hands relaxed at his sides. Mercer looked him up and down. Turn around. Marcus did. Hands where I can see them. Marcus raised them slightly. Across the street, a porch light came on. Someone had noticed the flashing lights. Ethan watched Mercer with increasing concern. Nothing Marcus had done suggested danger. Nothing about the stop justified the tension Mercer seemed determined to create. Daniel, Ethan said, keeping his voice neutral. Registration is clean. Mercer did not look at him. I heard you. License is valid. 2. I said I heard you. Marcus turned his head slightly. Officer Mercer, if everything checks out, am I free to go? Mercer stepped closer. You do not decide when this is over. Marcus said nothing. That silence seemed to irritate Mercer more than an argument would have. He pointed toward the open passenger door. What is in the folder? Legislative material. Mercer gave a short laugh. Legislative material. Yes. You a lawyer? No, lobbyist. No, Mercer's eyes narrowed. Then what exactly are you? Marcus looked at him for a long moment. A citizen. You stopped without explaining why. Ethan lowered his gaze for a second. The answer was calm, but it landed hard. Mercer stared at Marcus, then reached toward the open vehicle. I am going to take a look. Marcus's voice sharpened, though it never rose. I do not consent to a search. Mercer froze with one hand near the door frame. The blue folder sat less than 2 feet away, its state seal clearly visible beneath the street lamp. For the first time, Ethan noticed the smaller line printed beneath it. Senate Committee on Public Safety and Oversight. His stomach tightened. Daniel, he said again, quieter this time. You really need to slow this down. Mercer finally looked back at him. Whose side are you on? Ethan did not answer. Marcus did. That should not be the question. The silence that followed was brief, but something in the stop had changed. Mercer had begun the encounter believing he controlled every inch of the street. Now there were witnesses, a second officer asking questions, and a folder he had not yet opened but was already beginning to fear. Mercer's eyes stayed on the blue folder, but his attention had shifted from curiosity to irritation. He did not like that Ethan had noticed the committee seal. He liked even less that Marcus had challenged the direction of the stop without ever raising his voice. "Stay where you are," Mercer said. Marcus remained beside the vehicle, shoulders relaxed, hands visible. Ethan stepped closer to the passenger side and looked through the open door without touching anything. The words beneath the state seal were clearer now. Senate Committee on Public Safety and Oversight. He looked at Marcus, then back at Mercer. "Daniel, this may be official state material." Mercer gave him a cold glance. "You planning to read every folder you see on a traffic stop now?" "No. I am saying we should verify before this gets any further." Mercer turned back toward Marcus. "You carrying state documents around in your car?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they belong to my office." The answer landed harder than Mercer expected. For a moment, even Ethan stopped moving. Mercer narrowed his eyes. "Your office?" Marcus nodded. "That is what I said." "What office?" Marcus could have answered immediately. He could have said State Senate. He could have given his district number, his committee assignment, his years in public service. Instead, he looked at Mercer and asked, "Would my job change the reason you stopped me?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "You ask a lot of questions." "Because you still have not answered the first one." A second porch light came on across the street. Then another. The woman near the sidewalk was still recording. Mercer noticed her again and raised his voice. "Ma'am, keep your distance." She did, but the phone stayed up. Ethan leaned slightly toward Mercer. "We should run everything, document the stop, and clear it if there is no issue. I know how to do my job." "Then do it by the book." Mercer turned sharply. "That is enough." The tension between the two officers was now impossible to miss. Marcus watched them carefully. He had seen this pattern before in hearings, complaints, and interviews. One person escalated. Another person recognized it. Then came the moment when somebody had to decide whether loyalty meant protecting a colleague or protecting the rules. Mercer looked at Marcus again. "You think you know procedure better than I do?" "I think procedure matters most when emotions do not." Mercer let out a short breath through his nose. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Ethan immediately looked at him. "For what?" Mercer ignored him. Marcus stayed still. "Officer Mercer, am I being detained?" "You are now." "On what basis?" Mercer stepped closer. "Failure to cooperate with an investigation." Marcus's expression did not change. "I have provided identification, registration, answered your questions, exited the vehicle when ordered, and kept my hands visible the entire time." Ethan spoke quietly. "He has." Mercer shot him another look. "Cole." Ethan held his ground. "I am just stating what happened." Mercer reached for the handcuffs on his belt. The metal gave a small, unmistakable sound. Marcus looked at him, then at the body camera clipped to his uniform. "Before you continue," Marcus said, "make sure that camera is recording." Mercer gave a humorless smile. "Worried about your reputation?" Marcus glanced toward the blue folder, then back at him. "No, I am worried about yours." For the first time that night, Mercer hesitated. The hesitation lasted less than a second, but Ethan saw it. Marcus saw it too. Mercer looked down at the body camera on his chest, then back at the man standing beside the vehicle. "Turn around," he repeated. Marcus did not argue. He turned slowly and placed his hands behind his back. The handcuffs closed with a quiet click that seemed louder than anything else on the street. No one spoke. The woman across the sidewalk kept recording. Ethan stood near the patrol car with his arms at his sides, watching the moment settle into something none of them could easily undo. Mercer guided Marcus a few steps toward the rear of the cruiser and stopped him there. "Maybe now you will understand who is in charge," he said. Marcus looked toward the flashing lights reflecting across the wet pavement. "Authority is not the same thing as being right." Mercer gave a dismissive shake of his head. "Everybody suddenly knows the law when they are the one in cuffs." Marcus turned his eyes toward him. "Some of us know it before that." Ethan exhaled slowly. He had already checked the license. He had already checked the registration. There was no outstanding warrant, no stolen vehicle report, No obvious reason to stop should still be escalating. Daniel, we need a supervisor, he said. Mercer looked irritated. We do not need anything. We have a detained driver, official state material in the vehicle, and a dispute about the basis for the stop. We need a supervisor. Marcus watched Ethan carefully. The younger officer was no longer simply uncomfortable. He was making a choice. Mercer walked back toward the open passenger door. The blue folder remained on the seat. If this is so official, he said, then maybe we should see what is inside. Marcus's voice became firmer. I have already told you that I do not consent to a search. Mercer paused. You hiding something? No, then why care? Marcus looked at him. Because rights do not become optional when exercising them makes an officer suspicious. Ethan stepped closer. Daniel, leave the folder alone until a supervisor gets here. Mercer turned toward him. You giving me orders now? I am trying to keep this from becoming worse. Mercer stared at Ethan for several seconds, then looked back at Marcus. A porch door opened across the street. An older man stepped outside and stood beneath the awning, saying nothing. Another phone appeared in a nearby window. The stop was becoming public in a way Mercer had not expected. He walked toward the cruiser and picked up Marcus's license again. Marcus Reed, he muttered, typing the name into the mobile computer. Ethan moved to the passenger side and watched the screen. A second passed, then another. The database refreshed. Ethan's expression changed first. Daniel. Mercer kept typing. What? Look at the full return. Mercer glanced at the screen. Marcus Reed, 46 years old. Richmond address. Valid license. Then a government identifier appeared below the standard information. Ethan read it twice before speaking. State legislative credential. Mercer's face tightened. Could be outdated. Ethan shook his head. It was verified this year. Marcus stood several feet away, still restrained, watching them through the reflection in the cruiser window. Mercer turned toward him. You work for the Senate? Marcus answered evenly. I serve in it. The street went completely still. For the first time since the stop began, Daniel Mercer had no immediate answer. The words seemed to hang between the patrol car and the wet curb, simple enough to understand, difficult enough to accept. You serve in it, Mercer repeated. Marcus kept his eyes on him. Yes. Ethan looked from the computer screen to Marcus, and then back to Mercer. He is a sitting state senator. Mercer's face tightened, as though the confirmation itself had offended him. That does not change the stop. Marcus answered before Ethan could. It should not. Mercer blinked. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus shifted his weight slightly, careful not to make any sudden movement with his hands still secured behind him. It means my title should not be the reason I am treated differently now. If your decisions were lawful 5 minutes ago, they are lawful now. If they were not, my job does not repair them. Ethan lowered his eyes for a second. The woman across the street was still recording, and the older man under the awning had not moved. Mercer looked around and seemed to notice, perhaps for the first time, how many people were watching. He reached for his radio, requesting a supervisor to my location. His voice was flatter now, less certain. Marcus turned slightly toward the open passenger door of his vehicle. The blue folder remained exactly where he had left it. Ethan followed his gaze. What is in that file? He asked, this time without accusation. Marcus took a breath. Material prepared for a public safety oversight hearing. Mercer looked back at him. About what? Marcus was silent for a moment. Complaints. Ethan's expression sharpened. From this district? Some of them. Mercer gave a short laugh that sounded forced. So now this is some kind of investigation? Marcus looked at him. I did not say that. You are carrying complaint files from our district, and I am supposed to believe that means nothing. I said they are oversight materials. About officers? Marcus did not answer immediately, and that pause unsettled Mercer more than any accusation could have. Headlights appeared at the far end of the block. A marked vehicle approached slowly and stopped behind the first cruiser. Captain Robert Hayes stepped out, buttoning his jacket against the cold. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with the tired expression of someone who had been called to too many scenes that should never have become scenes at all. He looked first at Mercer, then at Ethan, then at Marcus in handcuffs. What happened? Mercer started speaking quickly. Suspicious vehicle, inconsistent answers, possible interference with official materials, failure to cooperate. Ethan turned toward him. That is not how it happened. Hayes looked at Ethan. Then tell me how it happened. Ethan did. Not dramatically. Not defensively. Just an order. Valid license. Valid registration. No warrant. No refusal to identify. No attempt to leave. No threat. No consent to search. Then he added, and the driver is State Senator Marcus Reed. Hayes went completely still. His eyes moved to Marcus. Senator Reed? Marcus nodded once. Hayes looked at the cuffs, then at Mercer. Something in his expression changed, but before he could speak, a phone began ringing inside his patrol vehicle. Hayes glanced toward it, annoyed by the timing. It rang again. Ethan looked at the screen through the open door. "Captain," he said quietly, "you may want to take that." Hayes stepped closer, saw the caller identification, and stopped. The name displayed there did not belong to the police chief, the city attorney, or anyone in the department. It belonged to the office of Governor Thomas Whitmore. Captain Hayes stared at the caller identification for half a second longer than he meant to. Then he answered, "Captain Robert Hayes speaking." His posture changed almost immediately. Ethan noticed it first. Mercer noticed it next. Marcus simply watched. Hayes turned slightly away from the street, listening more than speaking. "Yes, sir." A pause. "Yes, Governor." Another pause. Longer this time. Hayes looked back toward Marcus, then toward the cuffs around his wrists. "I understand." His voice had lost every trace of irritation. "Yes, sir. I will verify everything personally." Mercer shifted his weight. The confidence he had carried since the stop began was beginning to disappear. Hayes ended the call and stood still for a moment, the phone still in his hand. Then he looked directly at Mercer. "Remove the cuffs." Mercer frowned. "Captain, I was in the middle of—" Hayes did not raise his voice. "Remove them." Mercer hesitated. Ethan stepped forward slightly, but Hayes lifted one hand, stopping him. "Officer Mercer will do it." The street was silent again. Mercer approached Marcus and unlocked the handcuffs. Click. The same sound that had seemed final minutes earlier now meant something completely different. Marcus slowly brought his hands forward and rubbed one wrist, not dramatically, just enough to restore circulation. Mercer avoided his eyes. "Senator, I did not know who you were." Marcus looked at him. "That is the problem." Mercer finally met his gaze. "Excuse me." Marcus's voice remained calm. "You think this changed because you learned my title?" Hayes said nothing. Ethan said nothing. Even the woman recording across the street seemed to hold her breath. Marcus continued. "I gave you valid identification. I followed your instructions. I answered your questions. Your partner told you the vehicle was clear. None of that mattered until someone important called." Mercer opened his mouth, but Marcus raised one hand slightly. "I am not asking for an apology because I am a senator. I am asking you to understand why the apology should never depend on that." Hayes looked down toward the pavement. The words had landed on him too. Mercer tried again. "I was doing my job." Marcus glanced toward the body camera on his chest. "Then the recording will show that." Mercer's face tightened. Marcus turned toward Hayes. "Captain, I want every recording from this stop preserved. Body cameras, vehicle cameras, radio traffic, dispatch notes. Everything." Hayes nodded. "It will be. And the folder stays exactly where it is." Hayes looked toward the sport utility vehicle. "Understood." Mercer followed his gaze, and Marcus saw the question forming before the officer asked it. "What is in that folder?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the passenger side and stopped beside the open door. The blue cover was still visible beneath the streetlight. Senate Committee on Public Safety and Oversight. Marcus touched the edge of it, but did not lift it. "Complaints," he said. Mercer swallowed. "About this precinct?" Marcus turned toward him. "Yes." The word was quiet. It did not need to be louder. Ethan's expression changed. Hayes looked at Mercer. Marcus continued. "Tonight was not part of that review. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive home." He paused. "Now it is evidence." Mercer's eyes moved toward his body camera. For the first time, the device on his chest no longer looked like equipment. It looked like a witness. The next morning, the story had already moved beyond the roadside. Captain Hayes had ordered every recording from the stop secured before the night shift ended, and by sunrise the department had begun an internal review. Marcus Reed did not call a press conference. He did not demand anyone be punished before the facts were examined. He returned to his office, placed the blue folder on his desk, and asked Rachel Brooks for one thing. "Add last night to the timeline." Rachel looked at him carefully. "Your stop." Marcus nodded. "Not because it happened to me. Because it matches what people have been telling us." That distinction mattered. By noon, Ethan Cole had submitted a written statement describing the encounter in exact sequence. Valid license. Valid registration. No outstanding warrant. No attempt to flee. No refusal to identify. A request for an explanation. An order to step out. A warning about consent. Then the handcuffs. Ethan included something else too. It was not his first time watching Daniel Mercer turn suspicion into certainty before the facts were clear. Internal Affairs pulled older complaints connected to Mercer and found 3 that carried familiar language. Drivers described being questioned about whether their vehicles belonged to them. Residents described routine encounters that became unnecessarily confrontational. In 2 cases, supervisors had marked the complaints as insufficiently supported. Marcus read the summaries in silence. He did not smile. There was nothing satisfying about discovering that his experience had happened before. The governor's phone call had opened the door, but the evidence walking through it belonged to people who had never received such a call. By afternoon, Captain Hayes sat across from an investigator in a quiet conference room, answering questions about department procedure and complaint review. "Were you aware of prior concerns involving Officer Mercer?" the investigator asked. Hayes hesitated. "I was aware there had been complaints." "And what happened to them?" Hayes looked down at the table. "They were reviewed through normal channels." "Were the patterns compared?" Another pause. "No." That answer became more important than anyone expected. The review widened. Not because the governor ordered a career to end, but because the department could no longer treat each incident as isolated when the same details kept repeating. Mercer was removed from street duty while the investigation continued. His body camera footage from Marcus's stop was examined beside older reports, dispatch records, and witness statements. Ethan's account matched the recording. So did the woman's phone video. So did Marcus's calm voice asking the same unanswered question again and again. Why was he being stopped? Days later, Mercer sat alone in an administrative hearing room while an investigator placed several folders on the table. His expression changed when he recognized the names. "These are old complaints," he said. "Yes," the investigator replied. "That is why we are reviewing them together." Mercer leaned back. "This is happening because he is a senator." The investigator looked at him for a long moment. "No, it is happening because one senator had the visibility to make us look at what other people had already reported." Across town, Marcus stood at the window of his office while traffic moved below in the late afternoon light. Rachel approached with an updated briefing. They found more cases. Marcus took the folder but did not open it immediately. "How many?" Rachel told him. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. The number was larger than he had hoped and smaller than he feared. Then he looked down at the handwritten sentence from the town hall, still visible in the margin of his original notes. People should not need connections to be treated fairly. This time, he underlined it. 3 weeks later, Marcus Reed sat beneath the high ceiling of a state hearing chamber listening to a man named Terrence Walker describe a traffic stop that had happened 8 months earlier. Terrence was not a senator. He was not a lawyer, a police chief, or anyone with a direct line to the governor. He was a 42-year-old electrician, a father of 2, and a man who had spent most of his life believing that if he followed the rules would protect him. His voice trembled only once. "I kept asking what I had done wrong," he said. "Nobody answered me." Marcus lowered his eyes to the notes in front of him. The words felt familiar. Too familiar. Across the room, Captain Hayes sat behind department counsel. Ethan Cole waited nearby after agreeing to testify about what he had witnessed during Marcus's stop. Daniel Mercer was no longer assigned to patrol while the review continued, and several older complaints were now being examined together instead of being dismissed one by one. But Marcus understood that none of that was the ending. Not yet. When Terrence finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Walker, thank you for coming here." Terrence nodded. Marcus continued. "I want to ask you something that has nothing to do with my office. When you realized no one was listening that night, what did you think?" Terrence looked toward the ceiling for a moment. "I thought maybe who I was did not matter." Marcus sat back. That answer followed him long after the hearing ended. Near sunset, he left the Capitol without staff and drove alone toward the neighborhood where Mercer had stopped him. The same streetlights glowed above the pavement. The same row of brick houses stood behind small lawns. Nothing about the block looked historic. Nothing marked the place where a routine encounter had become a statewide investigation. Marcus parked a short distance away and stepped out into the evening air. He walked to the spot beside the curb where he remembered standing under flashing lights, hands secured, listening to Mercer tell him that his title meant nothing. Marcus had thought about that sentence often. In one way, Mercer had been right. A title should mean nothing in a moment like that. A senator should not receive better treatment because he is a senator. A governor should not have to make a phone call before basic fairness becomes urgent. A citizen should not need influence, status, cameras, or powerful friends before someone decides to listen. Marcus looked across the street and remembered the woman who had kept recording. He remembered Ethan choosing to speak when silence would have been easier. He remembered Hayes answering the call, then realizing that the problem had started long before the telephone ever rang. His phone vibrated in his coat pocket. Rachel had sent an update. The Oversight Committee had approved an independent review process for future complaints, including pattern tracking across officers and precincts. Marcus read the message twice, then put the phone away. It was progress, not victory. Progress. He turned back toward his vehicle, but before opening the door, he looked once more at the empty stretch of road. The governor's call had helped one senator that night. Justice began when they finally asked how many people had never received that call.